you won't know, some of you, particularly younger people, won't know who I am. I'm Michael Brittany Jones, as opposed to Michael Normandy and many other things Jones, who seems to have disappeared. I did see him going down the corridor. But it's my pleasure to chair this last of joint sessions in this room. And it's particularly nice that we have someone, Matt, who is just beginning his research career, and we have Michael, who is, we hope not at the end, but has actually recently retired, which of course will free him up to write the things which he hasn't written so far. And in between, we've got Irina, who is at Swansea and working quite hard, I hope. Yeah. So let's get on with it. Matt is a research student just beginning his doctorate at Hull with Andrew, and presumably about to get a new supervisor because Andrew has now taken retirement, and he is working particularly on the Earls under Edward III from 1330 to 1360, and this is his first presentation, so you must be kind to him, and in which he's going to set out some of the ideas which are guiding him in the work that he's doing. Matt?
Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't want to be the only person without a PowerPoint, so I've mocked up this extensive presentation consisting of one slide. What you can see here is an image from the Marmite Treatise, a superb illuminated manuscript that's in one of the Oxford colleges, and I've stolen it from the article. You can see reference there, and it's something that will, I think, become the relevance of which will become very clear over the course of the talk. It's Edward III at war, as you can see, surrounded by his various nobles, including two of the earls mentioned there. So that's a sort of pictorial framework for which I will go into greater detail verbally. So, to begin then. This paper aims to question the preeminence of the reciprocal relationship of service and reward put forward in the mid-20th century by K.B. Macfarlane as the basis for comital service on the campaigns of Edward III. Macfarlane thought that the English participants, including Edward's earls, fought primarily because they would be rewarded for doing so on a scale that would offset expenditure and risk. Examination of his thesis is important because it has provided the framework within which Edward's relations with his earls have been viewed since. Macfarlane's successors have concentrated emphatically, perhaps overmuch so, on the reward side of his argument. Patronage, we are told, was the centre around which the aspirations and considerations of the nobility revolved. This in turn has led to a gulf of interest between king and nobility, to which Macfarlane himself did not subscribe, which was bridged by material rewards. Thus, most recent work assumes a reward-service model requiring the dispensation of patronage by this famously generous monarch to buy domestic stability and support for Edward III's long wars. To this equation, Mark Ormerod has astutely added personal elements, emphasising the shared lifestyles and undoubted friendship between the king and many of his nobles, although loyal service was ultimately backed up by control of patronage. I wish to re-examine the relationship between service in war and reward to question whether Macfarlane's thesis proves wholly appropriate for Edward's earls. Perhaps it is time to reintroduce the wider principles framing political action into the picture. Today I will argue that the earls of Edward III gave their notably ardent service in war not first and foremost for material reward, but because contemporary ideas of their role in society obliged them to serve. It should at once be noted that this need not preclude the possibility that earls made great sums out of the 100 Years' War, or that they were not rewarded for especially outstanding service, that these considerations did not play their part in encouraging military participation. We need to begin by painting in broad brushstrokes the obligation of war placed upon the king and his earls, discerned from two categories of source material. From there we can go on to test the relevance of this conceptual paradigm by examining three earls as case studies for the dispensation of patronage in relation to their military careers. As I've just mentioned, there are two categories of sources through which the 14th century obligation of war can be recreated. which I have termed courtly and working. Courtly sources are those that probably did not have an active role in the everyday life of wider political society, such as the advice books known as the Mirrors for Princes, contemporary poetry and literature, chronicles and legal treatises such as Bracton. Such sources made it abundantly clear that the king was the defender of the realm, including, of course, his subjects. Thomas Aquinas' Advisory de Regno emphasises throughout that the monarch should act solely for the common good, identifying one of a king's fundamental duties as defence of the multitude from external attack. Building on this rich vein of Thomist thought, Walter Marmite hammered home this duty to the young Edward III in his advice book, presented to the new king shortly after his accession to the throne in 1327. War, wrote Marmite, would offer the realm the security it needed to thrive, for battle is the foundation of peace, since many preserve the peace on account of their fear of war. And it was not only in Marmite's treatise that the importance of successful defence was substantiated around this time. The famous military failures of Edward II pervaded the articles circulated to justify his deposition. In contrast to his father, the chroniclers were eager to remember Edward III as a great warrior king. Henry Knighton remembers him as the flower of this world's knighthood, for whom to do battle was to reign. And importantly, the contemporary poem The Vows of the Heron reveals the place the earls were expected to hold as the first to volunteer their services as Edward resolved to begin the 100 Years' War. Nor was this place new to the 14th century. In Bracton, law and war guaranteed each other, I'm quoting here, for each stands in need of the other, that the achievements of arms be conserved by the laws themselves preserved by support of arms. To achieve this, the king needed his earls, for kings associate such persons with themselves, investing them with great honour, power and name, when they gird them with swords, since the sword signifies the defence of the realm and the country. Importantly, we must note that the king was expected to be generous to his loyal followers, but that across a wide range of sources, these rewards were held to be for service of exceptional rather than routine nature. The problem with such courtly sources is that we do not know how much they were read or who had working knowledge of them. As such, they remain valuable, but our paradigm of obligation is greatly enhanced by examining the rhetoric of government documents. These documents include those which are used in the course of regular business by political society, or documents that reveal statements and thought in relatively routine contexts. We might include royal charters or letters patent, proclamations of legislation, the records of legal proceedings in the yearbooks or plea rolls, petitions to the Crown, and so on. It is of utmost importance here to recall that such documents form part of a dialogue that accompanied the remarkable reach of a startlingly pervasive royal bureaucracy. As Michael Clancy has taught us, royal documents had penetrated to every village by 1300, and this process would only accelerate as the wars of Edward III further stimulated the growth of government. Neither would exposure to these documents be limited to the literate. Charters, proclamations and letters patent were designed to be read out in the localities and displayed in the county court. So when we note rhetorical patterns in such documents, we need, to appropriate Quentin Skinner's terminology, to bear in mind not only what these documents are saying, but what they are doing by saying them. By distilling the principles of just warfare and disseminating this rhetoric throughout the realm, these working instruments are both creating and fulfilling the expectations of a wide political society that wanted and needed to use them in everyday life, thus conditioning a dialogue of government between centre and locality. An extremely common speech act is the justification of an order for service on the grounds of necessity. Military and parliamentary summons and associated orders of every kind, such as calls for and grants of taxation, were justified for the salvation and defence of our realm in all kind of administrative records. And no one received such commands with greater regularity during the 100 Years' War than the king's natural companions, the earls. Their role was explicitly set out in the creation charters of the new earls of 1337, which proclaimed, "Among the signs of royalty, we considered it to be the most important that, through a suitable distribution of ranks, dignities and offices, its position is sustained by the wise counsels and protected by the many powers of formidable men." Allied with their central role in the practicalities of recruitment and leadership on campaign, the Earls of Edward III can have been in little doubt of the role placed upon them and their great wealth by the wider community. To sum up, they were to use their private landed power as the main buttress to a public royal authority that was expected to secure the internal peace of the realm by ensuring successful defence against external attack. Such considerations were fundamental to kingship and formed a large part of any earl's public life, or at least this was supposed to be the case. With this conceptual framework in place, we can now test of the theoretical at any relation to the realities of comital service in the wars of Edward III by moving on to men and events. I hope I can be forgiven for merely sketching the pattern of service and patronage of a select sample of earls. 2 or 3 examples do not make a generalisation, as Macfarlane himself conceded, but for the sake of time I will focus on 3 of Edward's earls, namely William Bohun, created Earl of Northampton in 1337, and thus in need of an appropriate landed estate, and the Earls of Pembroke and Warwick, Lawrence Hastings and Thomas Beauchamp, members of established families. These examples are, I think, representative of their selective groupings. The military career of William Bohun, a younger son of the Bohun Earls of Hereford and Essex, provides a dramatic study in what could be achieved by the concentration of resources on a highly able recipient. William served throughout the early Scottish wars as a banneret of the royal household. As a younger son, he did not inherit any notable estate of his own. Bohun did, however, have access to the recruitment networks of his family without a natural leader due to the physical incapacity of his brother Humphrey, Earl of Hereford and Essex. We may begin to see this reflected in the medium-sized retinues he brought to the Scottish expeditions of 1335 and 6, peaking at 56 men-at-arms. The real step change for Bohun, however, came in 1337, when he received the dignity of the Earldom of Northampton, with £1,000 per annum to be received until the designated lands became available. This great boost in prestige and means allowed Bohun to become a leading figure in the 100 Years' War, and careful work on the personnel of his retinue by Andrew Ayton has shown how his newfound financial muscle enabled William to exploit the recruitment networks of his family to full effect. Prominent in diplomacy from 1337 until his death in 1360, he took huge retinues to the campaigns in the Low Countries from 1338 to 40, reaching a peak of 139 men, fought at the naval battle of Slees in 1340, and served as the King's Lieutenant in Brittany in 1342 with a personal retinue of 199 men. The mid-1340s saw reappointment as Lieutenant of Brittany before Bohun fought at Cressy and spent much of 1347 besieging Calais. He served against the Spanish on the sea in 1350 and accompanied the king of another powerful company on the Rheims campaign of 1359 to 60, after which he died. When viewed over the 30-year period from 1330 to 60, it becomes very clear that Edward's grant of 1337 transformed the trajectory of Bohun's military career, and provided the money to exploit his family's recruitment networks in the course of fulfilling his obligations of service. It was possible after 1337, essentially, for Bohun to become one of the standout figures of this stage of the war. Similar claims could be convincingly advanced for the careers of the 3 other new men raised to earldoms in 1337. Some further considerations can be drawn out of his career. First, it may be illustrative in bringing to life the part the written word could play in our paradigm of obligation to trace the practical role of the creation patent mentioned above, containing the evocative phrasing claiming the powers of formidable men to be central to the upkeep of the realm. This wording was followed in the patent specifying the sums assigned in support of his earldom dignity, by the pointed reasoning that these grants were given for the better support of his estate. This was not a phrase limited to singular usage. In the course of collecting these assignments twice a year, Bohun or his attorney had to show this patent to the relevant customs official or sheriff. The official would, on successful payment, be given letters of acquittance from the Earl to be audited in the Upper Exchequer, on inspection of the letters of acquittance and of the original mandate. And so the rhetoric, including William's girding of his comital sword in the manner portrayed in Bracton, which met and reinforced the expectation that earldoms are granted in support of the crown, and that his patronage was specifically in support of this dignity, descended the parliamentary stage at Westminster and became subsumed into the busy and somewhat harried lives of local officials and exchequer clerks. Second, it is certainly worth noting that Boon was faced with substantial arrears accumulated through the cost of his near-constant service, including standing surety for the king's monstrous debts in 1340. For example, he was, by 1342, still owed £1,740 from arrears of wages due from 1337 to 40. Boon's military service was explicit in his creation, but the obligation was just as great for established earls. Lawrence Hastings, Earl of Pembroke, enjoyed a short but eventful career, spanning his effective coming of age in the late 1330s to his premature death in 1348. Hastings grew up as a minor in the king's wardship. By 1338, aged just 18, he was fighting with the king in the Low Countries as a banneret. He had not by 1338 received his inheritance, and this showed in the size of his retinue, an insignificant 3 men-at-arms. Early in the following year, although still underage, he was granted possession of this inheritance, and in October 1339 Hastings was confirmed to the title of Earl of Pembroke. In 1342, Pembroke served in Brittany with a hugely expanded retinue of 64 men. 1345 saw prolonged service alongside the Earl of Derby in Gascony for 159 men, as the English chevauché bravely won many glorious victories before Pembroke was besieged with the Earl of Stafford at Agincourt, where before the siege was lifted they were forced to eat their horses and cats. After returning to England, he took part in the Great Siege of Calais through 1347, winning a naval victory alongside the Earl of Northampton. The following year saw this notable career cut short by Pembroke's early death, and the earldom was once again subsumed into royal custody. Again, we can see that his military position and the size of the companies he could mobilise was dictated by the possession of a substantial landed endowment, in his case not one provided by the king, like Boon's, but one his by right of inheritance. A rehearsal of Pembroke's career is notable for our purposes in what is absent as well as what is written in the records. He received his inheritance and his title, as of course was to be expected, but virtually nothing else. Despite an intensive military career ranging from the Low Countries to Bordeaux, he received no stream of lands or offices. The reward side of the service-reward thesis is essentially absent. That he received his hereditary land and title will hardly suffice. It was inconceivable that either could be kept from him. Furthermore, after his death he was owed substantial debts by the Crown, to the tune of £2,000, over half of which was subsequently written off by his executors. Pembroke then did not receive royal patronage for his undoubted efforts in the war, nor is it likely he turned a profit by other means. This is true not only for Pembroke, but also largely for the Earl of Oxford, the Earl of Warenne, the Earl of Devon, the Earl of Gloucester, and the second Earl of Salisbury. It would be easy, however, to draw a line in the sand against Macfarlane's reciprocal relationship and its offspring too deeply and too starkly. Reward was certainly an aspect of the relationship between king and earls. As we have heard, the expectation that particularly notable service would be rewarded by a prince was commonplace at the time. Thomas Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, provides a fitting middle ground between Northampton and Pembroke. He received in 1329 his inheritance of the great earldom of Warwick while still well under age. He definitely served in the Scottish campaigns of 1333, having been, along with many other magnates, summoned for the defence of our realm and people and the conservation of our honour, since the Scots had repeatedly invaded with great force and open banners and had committed grievous acts of war. Like William Boon, Warwick returned frequently to Scotland over the next 3 years, during which time he was granted, at his request, release from the debts and relief attached to his inheritance. Unlike Boon, however, he had great estates on which to draw at this time, and his retinues during this time were substantial. By 1337 he had clearly distinguished himself in the field. In March he was appointed captain of the King's army in the marches of Scotland for, we may note this rhetorical flourish, the security of the march against the hostile aggression of the Scots. Again, clear, just war. He subsequently led an army of experimental composition comprising paid magnate retinues as well as voluntary levies from the counties, to which he contributed the largest single retinue, some 117 men-at-arms. Concurrent with his appointment in the marches were the gifts of the wardship of William Le Zouche, and probably in an effort to ease recruitment costs, the promise of 500 marks. Like many of the able-bodied earls, Warwick spent much of 1338 to 40 in the Low Countries, although he was also entrusted with the custody of Southampton for some of 1339, after a French raid the previous year had brought the horror of war to the south coast. In early 1340 he returned to Flanders for the siege of Tournai, shortly after which he was one of a group of nobles close to the king who were imprisoned as sureties for the king's debts. Warwick did not in these years benefit from gifts of lands, although he was able to have the exchequer coerced into accounting for the wages of his ancestors in the wars of Edward I, of which some £3,500 was acknowledged as owed and subsequently assigned between 1340 and 1348. The 1340s saw the blossoming of Warwick's military reputation. In 1342 he performed notable service in Brittany with a large retinue, and in the Crecy campaign he accompanied the king and fought in the vanguard of the great battle itself. He followed the Black Prince to Gascony in 1355, commanded the vanguard of the army at Poitiers, where, according to Baker's Chronicle, he and the Earl of Salisbury struggled like lions to see which of them could spill the most French blood on the soil. It was over this period that his sterling reputation as, in the words of the Abbot of Abingdon, a magnificent and powerful man and most energetic warrior, was secured. His undoubted prowess brought him valuable wardships after the campaigns of Brittany and Crecy, given for good and gratuitous service, and a gift of over £1,000 in December 1346, again given in consideration of good service in our war. Perhaps most notable was the opportunistic recovery of the Lordship of Gower, a valuable lordship in the March of Wales, in 1353, which the king confirmed again to Warwick, considering the good service of the Earl after the legal challenge of the Black Prince. A study of Warwick's military career and of the favour he received shows that, to a certain extent at least, there was an obvious correlation between military service and the pattern of reward. But what emerges clearly from such considerations is not that war was undertaken because these rewards constituted a give-and-take relationship of mutual benefit. Rather, and in tune with the sentiments of Malmy and others, we can see that Warwick was rewarded not for service in the war as such, still less as a prerequisite for such service, but for good service, for outstanding service. A military career of notable brilliance brought rewards. As we have seen, kings were supposed to be generous to those that deserved it. But this does not mean that such factors, tangible although they may be, form the primary consideration for Warwick or for any other earl. As has been demonstrated in the case of the Earl of Pembroke, loyal service did not necessarily bring reward. What role then did patronage have in the shape of the relationship between Edward III and his greatest subjects? We have seen it used to build up the power of William Bohun and to reward the Earl of Warwick, and we have seen it used not at all for the Earl of Pembroke. Examples along these lines could be multiplied. A consideration of utmost importance that has, I hope, been made abundantly clear by this paper is the relationship between effective military service and the possession of an appropriately substantial landed estate. The significance of this can be seen most clearly in the dramatic increase in the number of men mobilised by the Earls of Warwick and Pembroke after they gained access to their estates of comital value, if divergent origin. I suggest then that patronage was not the means by which Edward III fulfilled his half of Macfarlane's bargain, still less the means by which he coerced his rebellious earls into loyal service. It seems to me that its primary function was to alter the structure of the landed resources at the disposal of the Crown to enable the king to mobilise the comital support he needed to fulfil one of his fundamental duties, the defence of the realm. The use of patronage to reward an earl for outstanding military service forms an undeniable and important, but ultimately a secondary function in both political culture and in practice. That the earls served with such dedication seems explicable because it was their role in the framework of assumptions placed on the Crown to do so. The use of their private power for the defence of the realm in such a manner was one of their most fundamental functions in a polity built to ensure inward peace secured by an outward display of arms. Thank you very much.